Hi, I'm Lisa Kudrow. I'm glad you're here today. Mental health care and education is important to me. That's why I chose to become involved at UCLA, joining the Resnick Neuropsychiatric Hospital Board of Advisors and emceeing the galas and #WOW, the Wonder of Women Summit. I'm so excited that WOW and UCLA's Friends of Semel Institute Open Mind have joined together to bring outstanding, free virtual programs about mental health issues. This means you will hear conversations on the intersection of culture and science between renowned authors and filmmakers who share their personal stories and world-class UCLA scientists that highlight the latest in mental health research, care, and progress. I'm thrilled to welcome you to our Open Mind WOW series and hope to see you at many more programs.
Hi, I'm Vicki Goodman, and I too would like to welcome you to today's Open Mind program on mental health and the law, sponsored by the Friends of the Semel Institute for Neuroscience and Human Behavior at UCLA, the Resnick Neuropsychiatric Hospital Board of Advisors, and WOW, the Wonder of Women. We are thrilled that you are here, and we hope that you find today's program informative and inspiring. A huge thank you to Lisa Kudrow for her lovely welcome and for her dedication to mental health research, education, and clinical care programs at UCLA. We are so honored to have with us today Judge Katherine Mader, author of the critically acclaimed new book, Inside the Robe, A Judge's Candid Tale of Criminal Justice in America. Judge Mader will be joined in conversation by Dr. Jonathan Sherin, Director of the Los Angeles County Department of Mental Health, and the discussion will be moderated by author and attorney Terri Cheney. We are honored to welcome all of our distinguished guests to the Open Mind, and we are very grateful to them for taking the time from their busy schedules to be with us today. Since childhood, Judge Katherine Mader has had a passion for true crime, beginning with wanting to become Nancy Drew, her fictional heroine. Never veering off course, including interviewing gangster Mickey Cohen for her junior high school journalism class, much to the horror of her teacher, Katherine attended UCLA undergraduate school and UC Davis Law School. Beginning her career as an assistant public defender, she experienced the criminal justice system from every angle, other than being arrested herself, of course. Both prosecuting and defending complex murders such as the Hillside Strangler case in Los Angeles, serving as the first Los Angeles Police Department's Inspector General, which involved overseeing the LAPD disciplinary system, and as a Superior Court judge, spending 19 years in a felony trial courtroom in downtown Los Angeles. She retired in February 2020 to publish Inside the Robe. Judge Mader is also a co-founder of Fallen Angels, Chronicles of Los Angeles Crime and Mystery, as well as 2 other true crime books. She has written countless articles for legal magazines, as well as op-ed pieces and 2 personal essays for the Los Angeles Sunday Magazine. Additionally, she served as editor of California's statewide judges magazine, The Bench, from 2014 to 2017. We are also honored to welcome back Dr. Jonathan Sharon, who was a discussant for our Open Mind program featuring the book Bedlam last year when our programs were still in person at UCLA. Dr. Sharon is a longtime well-being advocate who has worked tirelessly throughout his career on behalf of the vulnerable populations. In his current role as director of the Los Angeles County Department of Mental Health, he oversees the largest public mental health system in the United States, with an annual budget approaching $3 billion. Prior to joining the Los Angeles County Department of Mental Health, Dr. Sharon served for over a decade at the Department of Veterans Affairs, where he had a variety of posts, most recently as Chief of Mental Health for the Miami VA healthcare system. He has also held a variety of academic posts, formerly as vice chairman for the Department of Psychiatry and Biobehavioral Sciences at the University of Miami, and currently as volunteer clinical professor both at UCLA and USC. In addition to his leadership in the health and human services sector, Dr. Sherin has made significant contributions to the field of neuroscience, which includes seminal sleep research studies published in Science magazine and a conceptual model of the psychosis process for which he received the prestigious Kemp Award from the American Psychiatric Association. Dr. Sherin completed his undergraduate work at Brown, his graduate studies at the University of Chicago and Harvard Medical School, and he did his psychiatry residency at UCLA. Unfortunately, Professor Ellen Sachs, who was originally scheduled to moderate today's discussion, is not able to join us. We are extremely grateful and honored to have with us today to pinch hit for Professor Sachs, renowned author and attorney Terri Cheney, who has stepped in with just a few days' notice to moderate today's discussion. Terri is a member of the board of directors of the Sachs Institute for Mental Health Law, Policy, and Ethics, which is the organization that Ellen Sachs founded at USC. Many of you who attended last week's Open Mind will recognize Terri, as she was our headline speaker just last Thursday when we featured her latest new book, Modern Madness, an Owner's Manual. Terri is also the author of the New York Times best-selling book Manic, which was translated into 8 foreign languages and optioned by HBO. Her dramatic life story, from Michael Jackson's attorney to mental health advocate, was recently adapted for the Amazon TV series Modern Love, where Anne Hathaway played Terri Cheney. Her writings and commentary about mental illness have been featured in the New York Times, the Atlantic, the Los Angeles Times, and countless articles and blogs, including her own ongoing blog for Psychology Today, which has had over 1 million views. Terri now devotes her advocacy skills to the cause of destigmatizing mental illness. In addition to serving on the Sachs Institute board, Terri is also on the honorary board of directors of the International Bipolar Foundation. She also served on the community advisory board for the UCLA Mood Disorders Research Program. And she currently lives in Los Angeles, where she says a certain amount of eccentricity seems to be appreciated. Now, just a quick announcement about a new Friends of Semel program that I am very excited to share with you. In addition to supporting the Open Mind and our Friends Research Scholar Program that awards grants to early career neuroscientists, I'm very pleased to announce the launch of our Open Mind Film Festival for high school students in Los Angeles County. Students are encouraged to submit short films highlighting their unique perspectives on mental health, with the goal of promoting understanding of their experiences and concerns. You can find more information about the Open Mind Film Festival on our website, friendsofthesemelinstitute.org. And a huge thank you to our board member, Mia Silverman, who spearheaded this effort. Just a few housekeeping notes. Today's program is being taped, so if any of your friends, colleagues, or family were not able to join us today, they will be able to find it on the Friends of Semel website beginning tomorrow. There will be a link there to our YouTube channel. You'll also find videos from other past programs, so be sure to check it out. Everyone's Zoom has been automatically set to mute, and we ask that it remain muted throughout the program, which will last for approximately 1 hour. The last 15 minutes are reserved for your questions. If you would like to ask any of our participants a question, please type it into the Q&A, which is located at the bottom of your Zoom, and we will do our best to get to as many questions as possible during the time allotted. And just one last thing. I hope you will think of our Open Mind series much like National Public Radio or public television. If you feel that our programs bring together thought leaders in science and culture to present free presentations about mental health issues, provide a valuable service to the public, we hope you will consider supporting our work if you can. You can find a donation link on our website, or even easier, you will receive a thank you note in your email tomorrow with a link to our website. Please know that every dollar matters and no donation is too small or too large. Now, please join me in giving a warm Zoom welcome to Judge Katherine Mader. Thank you so much.
Hello. Can everybody hear me? I hope so. So thank you so much for inviting me to this wonderful program. I'm delighted to be here. I wrote the book Inside the Robe because I realized after 45 years of working in the criminal justice system and seeing it from every possible angle, that the public really didn't understand how judges think, and particularly the political and the personal reasons that can affect decision-making of judges. To most people, I think judges are these mysterious creatures that sit somehow high above everyone else, and they dispense wisdom. And I'd like to think I'm like that, but I think we're all human beings. And the thing that I always hear is, well, we just want judges who can follow the law. And I have to tell you that as a trial judge, which most of judges are in this country, the law isn't really, when we decide what needs to be done with somebody, the law isn't really in a law book and it's not really on our computer. It can be very subjective, and following the law can result in very different results depending upon who the judge is, what their background, what their politics, what their life experiences have been. And we certainly know this by watching, and I've certainly seen certain judges who completely embraced the war on drugs. They were willing to send small-time addicts who were selling small amounts of drugs to state prisons for huge amounts of time. Then all of a sudden, someone in their family was affected by drugs, and then somehow they changed, and the rehabilitation model seemed more attractive than the punishment model for them. The same thing with respect to drugs and judges, I think also applies to mental health. It's a very frustrating situation and complicated for many judges. And I thought that the best way to illustrate it for you was to just tell you a couple of anecdotes about things that I saw in my court over the last few years. The next story I'm going to tell you is very typical. A young woman comes before me. She is in jail. She's a college student. She has no prior criminal record, but she had a psychotic break. And she believed that two people she saw on the street who were using their cell phones were actually taking pictures of her. She grabbed their cell phones, one of the people she actually hit in the face, and she was found by the police close by hiding. She was charged with 2 counts of a violent crime, robbery. They're both felonies, and she was in jail. She obviously needed medications. She obviously was suffering from some really severe mental health problems. The public defender who was assigned to her, and I have great admiration for public defenders, knew that she needed to be evaluated as to her competency. And of course, she was found to be not competent to stand trial, which means that she was not able to understand the nature of the charges against her or cooperate with her attorney. So she was in jail for a number of months, waiting to get to the top of the list to be sent to Patton State Hospital. When she got there, she got medicated. She got some form of treatment. She returned back to me a couple weeks later, and she was medicated. She was in good shape. She wasn't hearing voices. She was stable. She was logical, and she was ready to go back to college. Her mother and her sister were in the audience. They had arranged for an outpatient mental health program in their neighborhood, and they were ready to take her home. But wait a minute. What happened to her charges? She's charged with 2 counts of very serious felonies, 2 robberies. They weren't resolved. So the district attorney wanted her to plead guilty to 1 count of robbery. And he said, okay, 7 months in jail is enough. You can be released. But the defense attorney said, no way. A felony is going to follow her for life. She's not going to be hired. She's going to have problems getting housing. Too many bad consequences. I don't want her to plead guilty to a felony. But the DA wouldn't budge. So as a judge, I actually have a choice I can make. I can let it just play out between the prosecutor and the defense attorney and just wait and see what happens, or I can step into the fray. I can't change, because of legal reasons, I can't change the charge of robbery. That's up to the DA. So she's charged with robbery and that stays. But I know in my head that if I butt in to this whole thing, that the prosecutor is going to become upset with me. They're going to report my assertiveness to their supervisor. And then the supervisor is going to accuse me of becoming an advocate, as opposed to a neutral judge. And so you may ask, well, so what? Who cares if I'm viewed as an advocate? But I can tell you what kind of goes through the back of my mind. I couldn't really say this when I was a judge, but I'm telling you that I think it happens to every judge. It took me 12 years to get to this court, this felony trial courtroom that I have in downtown Los Angeles. I really wanted to go there because I really believe that that is kind of the epicenter of criminal justice in Los Angeles. And I wanted to be in that court, and I wanted to stay in that court. Well, district attorneys and defense attorneys have the opportunity to disqualify judges who they don't think are going to be fair to them 1 time in every criminal case. And it does happen. And so they can just decide, for instance, that I'm too much of an advocate in mental health cases, so the DA's office doesn't want to go to me anymore. It never happened, but I'm just giving you that example. So if the DA's office or the public defender's office disqualifies me in every one of their cases, I just sit there with a clean desk. I don't have anything to do. So what happens to a judge that has nothing to do? If a judge doesn't have any work to do, they can be transferred away from their coveted assignment that took them years to get. So the question always in my mind is a little thing that's a little whisper. How much flack am I willing to take? Well, in this particular case, I took what doesn't seem to be a lot of flack initially. I just said to the defense attorney, if these prosecutors don't agree, just go up the chain like you would in a department store or an airline or something and ask to talk to their supervisor. So that's what they did. They went over the head of the people in my court, and they got nowhere. But of course, I got even more flack for being an advocate, for even having the boldness to suggest that to the attorneys in my court. So what ends up happening is that it's just too bad. This young woman has to plead to 1 count of robbery, according to the prosecutor, and get out that day and go back to school and therapy, or she stays in her cell and she waits several months to go to trial. Well, that was kind of too much for me. The idea that the DA was willing to let this person out because I felt it was coercive, that they wanted to get that plea, which they probably would have, and let her out as a condition. So I just said, look, I'm letting her out, and I'm letting her out without bail, and she's going to fight her case from the outside. Now, you may ask yourself also, isn't there some new diversion program that I've heard about in which a defendant can have their charges ultimately dismissed if their offense was driven by their mental disorder? Yes, there is. Unfortunately, it wasn't available for her. a couple of years ago, if somebody gets into this program, they can sometimes live in a structured setting outside the jail and get therapy. And if they do everything right, they get their charges dismissed. The problem is that even with this new law, only about a third of the cases get through the court system on the diversion program when they get into court, because the prosecutors often resist it. And then what happens is that the judge has to give permission to go into the program over the prosecutor's objection. And then again, as a judge, you don't want to be the person who gives permission to release a robbery suspect who goes out and stops taking their meds and starts committing more robberies, because your standing in the DA's office is going to suffer. They teach us in judicial college to ask ourselves before every decision, how would this look as a headline in the Los Angeles Times? Judge releases drunk driving defendant who drives drunk and kills a child, or judge releases a domestic violence defendant who then stabs his ex-wife to death when he gets out. So we've got this situation now. I've got this woman on the outside. She's supposedly living at home and she's going to therapy, and my fingers are just crossed that everything goes okay. So what happens? It gets close to the Christmas holidays, actually, and my assigned district attorney is on vacation, and I get a substitute DA who is going to handle the pretrial in this case, and the young woman's in court. So he's a top step in the DA's office, but he's not a supervisor. So he doesn't care that the file is written all over in red. Do not, under any circumstances, change the offer in this case. He actually reduces the charge to grand theft person, which can ultimately be reduced to a misdemeanor and then dismissed. So we've got a student who is saved a lifetime of having a felony conviction on her record by a fluke, by having a substitute prosecutor come in at the last minute. And I'm saved the wrath of the DA's office because nobody finds out. And this prosecutor who knows what's going on takes the file back to his office. He puts it in probably the wrong file cabinet, and the file never sees the light of day again. So you got to ask yourself, is this the way to run a criminal justice system? And I have to tell you that for years, absolutely, that is the way it has been in the DA's office. Pretty much because the DA's office opposes a lot of diversion type programs for mental health defendants for the same reason as judges, that nobody wants to take the heat if something goes wrong. So besides having these types of problems, judges are also constrained by budget issues that hopefully Dr. Sherin is going to talk to us more about. As a judge, I wanted to send a lot more people than I could to residential programs because a lot more people obviously need them. But the problem was that there's not enough money to have good programs that I can send people to. There are a variety of programs for people with no money. Some are very professionally run. I used to really like actually the Tarzana Treatment Center, but some honestly are run by kind of shady characters who've just gotten into the business to make money. I also have to tell you, since I'm not a judge anymore, I can say whatever I want, that judges are evaluated by how fast they get through their cases and not let all the cases that are assigned to their court build up. So some judges, and it's very tempting when you can get a case off your calendar because there's a mental health program, you don't know that much about it, but both sides are willing to send the person. You just send the person because it's just one less statistic that you have to worry about on your calendar. Another problem that we have is Patton State Hospital. People who are charged with crimes, found incompetent, sent to Patton State Hospital are supposedly getting treatment there. My experience is that there is no real treatment because they don't have much money either to care for people. So we always hear that there's a script that the mentally ill defendants are taught. And the script is something like, what does a judge do? What does the jury do? What is your attorney trying to do for you? And once they memorize these certain parts of the script, they're ready to be returned to court as being competent. And sometimes it works because you get these people back after a couple of weeks, their meds have kicked in, they know what's going on in the courtroom. Sometimes it works, but sometimes the person just regresses, and then they have to be sent back to Patton again. But I don't consider Patton State Hospital a place where anybody is really getting any sort of treatment. I'm going to tell you one last anecdote about things that happen. You kind of scratch your head and go, you can't really believe it, but it's true. I did a jury trial where a defendant with long, stringy, dirty gray hair, obviously mentally ill, obviously suicidal, was dressed in this, had a blanket wrapped around him so he couldn't hurt himself. He's charged with an assault with a box cutter, in which a shopkeeper in his neighborhood was threatened but not hurt. The defendant had been in custody for like 11 months. He's sitting at the counsel table making these kind of guttural sounds and wrapping like pieces of paper like this constantly during the trial and then just throwing them without writing anything on the paper. So neither the prosecutor nor the defense attorney mentioned the fact that he was obviously mentally ill. And the jury's like looking at him going, what are we doing here? I mean, what is happening? But the fact was, which we couldn't really tell them, was that the trial was the only way we could solve this case, to resolve the case. He was found to be competent. And again, the DA supervisor wasn't going to go along with mental health treatment. They felt he was dangerous, which is their right, but they wanted 4 years in state prison. And I could have taken the case out of their hands. This is another way of describing what I was talking about before. I could have just said, okay, forget it. I'm going to allow him to plead to something that gets him mental health treatment. We're not going to waste all this time with a jury trial, but I can't do that in every situation. We've got a DA supervisor who's saying, I'm not going to reward the defendant with a misdemeanor. I've got a whining DA who just doesn't want to do trials, and so she can just do the trial. Well, what ended up happening is we did the trial. The jury found him not guilty of anything. And he was released to the streets. And what happens often, and Dr. Sharon can speak of this, is mentally ill defendants get released from the jail to the streets. Sometimes they're given some medication for a few days. Sometimes they're given a shot that lasts a little bit longer. Sometimes they're given a piece of paper and told that they need to show up at a particular location so that they can get their medications. But many people just never show up. And this happens all the time. And we see people just like this all over the streets. So just to finish, what happened to this college student that I told you about right when we started? Unfortunately, like so many other people, she didn't like the way the psych meds made her feel. She ran away from her mother's house. She was living on the streets. She's likely self-medicating with street drugs, and I never saw her again. I don't want you to think it's all negative from the viewpoint of the bench. We do see that there is a new recognition that there is more to caring for the mentally ill criminal defendants than either just locking them up or sending them to the ERs or putting them in jail. There are new diversion programs that Dr. Sharon, I'm sure, will be able to talk about. There was a RAND study in January of 2020 that said that more than half of all mental health prisoners in the Los Angeles County Jail were good candidates for diversion. That's a huge number because I think there's around 4,000 or 5,000 people with mental health problems in the jail, of which half of those should go into a diversion program, but it's just not going to happen. We always see that there's all this money that is being passed and distributed and such to mental health programs. I'm just telling you from the point of view of what I saw in the courtroom. I don't know where the money is going. But I'm going to turn this over now to Dr. Sharon and Terri Cheney, and hopefully we can get some answers. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge Mader, and welcome, Dr. Sharon. I hope you all can hear me. Judge Mader has very kindly asked me to call her Katherine, which I'm going to reluctantly do, even though I'm an attorney, and that sort of doesn't come trippingly on the tongue. Thank you, Katherine. And Dr. Sharon, would it be all right if I called you Jonathan?
I would, well, you can just call
me
me
Dr. Sharon?
John.
John, okay, terrific. Thank you both so much, and I highly recommend, again, see, I'm tripping on Katherine. Katherine's book, Inside the Robe, is absolutely fascinating, not just for attorneys, but for anyone who has, you know, watched all the TV programs about the law. You really see what's going on in the courtroom from a totally new perspective from that dais. And I just found it gripping and highly recommend it to anyone who's interested in the law or just in society. And Dr. Sharon or John, you had such an impressive introduction. I just wondered, what exactly do you do every day? Can you describe a little bit about what your job entails?
Well, I mean, a lot of different things. Yeah, you know, ultimately my job, as I see it, needs to focus on empowering the trenches of our communities. And really by that, I mean, of course, delivering care to people that need it, listening to people who have needs, facilitating the work of my frontline providers, you know, around the county, because that's really, that's the interface, that's the sacred interface. But, you know, I mean, there's a lot of people, a lot of different organizations, you know, it's a big department. Like I said, it's a $3 billion department. We have lots and lots of services that we deliver through our own staff and our own facilities. We have tons of contracts. Obviously, engage the communities and trying to do that in an entirely different level, to share information and get out awareness, and also to provide, to get feedback and guidance, because really they're the engineers. To partner with county departments, with other jurisdictions, to support and get help from my 5 bosses, the supervisors of Los Angeles County. A lot of engagement with philanthropy, who's been super helpful in facilitating and kind of igniting some of our more creative initiatives. Tons of stuff with the state, whether it's with the administration or associations, and certainly with the legislature on a lot of stuff. I mean, I could go on and on.
Quite a job description, my goodness. I understand Vicki told me that you actually do work on the streets. However, you yourself.
I do. I've always felt that it was really important to, you know, to see and feel the work, and I do it to maintain a good understanding about why it's so important, and to help people, because there's nothing like helping somebody.
I agree.
To leading by example. You know, it's pretty hard when I'm really pushing hard to develop street psychiatry and a whole different level of street outreach, engagement, and treatment. It's hard for staff to not do it when the director does it.
That makes sense.
So, you know, there's the credibility piece there, but, you know, if I could, maybe I could just provide a little bit of framework, and I would love to try to, you know, answer questions that Katherine, Judge, might have. Now, I mean, you mentioned that there are so many people in the jail who have, you know, mental illness and certainly addictions. I mean, to be honest with you, addictions are as big a problem in the streets and in the jails, frankly, as well as in the child welfare system and in probation. But the reason why people collect there and that they collect in the streets is because our society really does not, our communities are not enriched and are not inclusive, and people fall out of those communities when they have disabilities, when they're ill, particularly when those involve issues of mental illness and addictions, behavioral health, because there are some very difficult behaviors that are associated with brain disease. So, they drive behaviors that lead to disruption in the community, and illegal behavior. And so it's not a surprise. It's not a surprise because we don't have the communities that we need in order to hold people and to have them, give them purpose, give them belonging. And that's really will ultimately be, the longer term solution. And by that, I don't just mean communities that have treatment. Yes, we have to have treatment, but we have to have, and we need to have good access to treatment, but we also need to deal with the social determinants of health. People need, individuals that are suffering from mental illness need people, place, and purpose. They need support. They need kinship. They need a place to live, and they need something to do. Without those things, treatment is actually rings hollow. And we don't realize that. We don't reimburse that at the state or the federal level because it doesn't, occur to people who really are not in the trenches, that those things are critical to people's lives and to people complying with care. Because our communities are not whole, they're not enriched, people fall out. And like I said, they fall into the streets and they fall into the jail. And what we need to do is we need to build a perimeter, a very intensive perimeter. We call it a crisis system around the community so that when people are falling out, we can actually engage them and give them treatment. And that really relates a lot to the whole, I would say, social justice, public safety reform efforts that are afoot, so that you respond to health and human service needs like an illness with a health and human service resource.
Right.
Not necessarily law enforcement, which can lead to horrible things, including having someone just get carted off to jail, and bringing people who are having issues that are acute, destabilized, into places where they can be received and they can be stabilized over periods of time, and then reconnected back into the community instead of falling out. So I just mentioned that basic framework because I think it's important to understand that. And we, the Department of Mental Health, are investing big time in enriched communities and attending to social determinants. We're investing big time in the expansion of our mobile response teams, as well as in our bed capacity. And we're doing a lot of reentry stuff in, particularly in the streets, but also in the jails, along with our key partner, the Department of Health Services, to get people out who have a medical condition and are going to languish and worsen when they're punished as opposed to nourished.
That's fascinating. And I'm sure Katherine, you feel.
You can say Judge Mader.
It just won't come out of my mouth. There is a lot of, and I don't think what the audience might not know about Katherine is that she was at one point the Inspector General of the LAPD, correct?
Yes.
Yes. So you have great familiarity with the police street interaction. And I wanted to ask both of you, there is so much talk these days about revamping the police and having trained mental health professionals, as you are indicating, John, intervene in situations on the street. Do you think it's a workable concept? And how can the police actually determine when professionals might be able to diffuse a situation? And either one.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I can start. It's a huge issue, and yeah, it's totally feasible, and we've been doing it. LA County, actually going back decades, is one of the leaders in looking at how law enforcement and mental health professionals correspond. And one of the things that has to be built, in addition to what I had described for our crisis system, is a regional call center. So all the call centers that are so disparate and disconnected and siloed have to actually be working together, so that when calls come in, they can be evaluated and triaged, and an appropriate team or set of teams dispatched. And there's three basic forms. I mean, there's the pure law enforcement response, when there's someone that's brandishing a gun and it's there's a clear evidence of a crime or violence. There's co-response teams, and we have a lot of them right now, where we put a clinician alongside a sheriff's deputy or a policeman from one of the city police departments to respond. And more, like I said, we're growing our mental health and our behavioral health response in real time. And I think with Measure J, with the Alternatives to Incarceration movement in the county, frankly, with things that are happening in the state, I hope we're going to have more resources to build that out. And in fact, just recently, some of you may be aware that we partnered with the city of Los Angeles to create what we call Therapeutic Transport. These are vans that have people with lived experience, a clinician, a driver, telepsychiatry capacity, and we will not only provide treatment and stabilization to people in the streets, but we will transport them where they need to go, which could be back to our boarding care. It could be to an urgent care, as I mentioned. It could be to the hospital. In the past, we've relied upon strapping someone into an ambulance or putting him in the back of a police car, which is just completely inappropriate given the demand of someone that's in a crisis.
Not only that, I was just going to say, not only that, but when people are having a mental health crisis and they're taken to the hospital, to the emergency room, my understanding is that the police officer needs to stay with them until whatever it is resolved. So you're wasting a lot of time and money of police officers who are off the streets for that time period. I was also just going to say one more thing, that the problem, I think, as this whole new concept gets rolled out, is that there's this kind of gray area, because a mental health emergency can turn into a very dangerous police emergency and violent emergency very quickly. And certainly social workers and psychologists can't deal with a mentally ill person who is having a domestic violence dispute, let's say, and just hurt their spouse or partner, and they think it's going to be just kind of a simple thing, and only one of them is going to be in the residence, and then all of a sudden the other one comes back to the house, and you really need police, because then could be weapons involved and it's a mess.
Completely agree. I mean, as I had said, when we do an assessment and evaluate, we can make our best guess at what's the most appropriate response, and we could dispatch a team or teams. A given situation, as you're saying, can evolve in many, many different ways. It's a dynamic situation. It's one of the reasons why it's important to have someone trained in de-escalation there, because that can influence whether it becomes an issue for the police or whether it becomes an issue that can be managed in mental health. You also bring up a really important point about the emergency departments. I mean, and I remember this because I trained at UCLA, and I remember being at Harbor. I remember being in the emergency department with the sheriff or police, and they were just like, can you please get this person? And we were jammed. And one of the things that actually does is that it leaves law enforcement with no choice but to take someone to jail, where they can actually move quickly or leave them or stay with them in the hospital. And that's a terrible situation. And frankly, we have put a burden on law enforcement for public safety that's inappropriate for a long, long time. And we need to actually step up and help them along those lines. So I think your points are spot on, and really, really reflect some of the systemic, problems and flaws in our system.
Well, let me ask you both. As a mental health advocate, the hardest question I ever get is, what do you do about a person who doesn't want help or won't accept help? I'm sure you've both seen that scenario countless times. Do you have any thoughts or suggestions about that?
Dr. Sharon, I'm sure, has more than I, and certainly I've read about mental health advocates that keep visiting the same person on the street over and over and over, and develop relationships and ultimately talk them into getting help. One of the problems we have in the judicial system is that sometimes defendants don't really want help, but their attorneys tell them that agreeing to get help is the only way that they're going to get out of jail. So
Wow.
they'll agree to anything to get out of jail.
There's not enough time on this particular program to go into it, but I'll try to give a real Reader's Digest here. This is an issue of engagement, and part and parcel of having particularly serious mental illness is a lack of insight.
Yes.
So whereas someone might have some other type of medical problem, they're going to reach out and want to get help. And in fact, it's quite the opposite with a lot of our clients. And in fact,
you're referring to anosognosia?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's particularly problematic for people who have been in the system and it hasn't gone well. So they're like, the last time that someone came to me and said they wanted to help me, I ended up getting thrown into a hospital, locked up, chased around with a needle. That's my memory. So get away from me. And I don't want to go. Nothing's wrong with me anyway. So this is a big issue. And there are certain things available to us. There's AOT, which is Laura's Law. There's also conservatorship with LPS. There's short-term holds that are available to us. But the fact of the matter is that we do not have an adequate, in my opinion, arsenal of engagement tools and what I call an engagement continuum, or I call them the tools of engagement, where we can step up over time to try to engage people who have needs based on humanitarian principles, and that we do that, and we only do that when we can come with resources. I'm not going to have my teams spending time going out try to engage someone unless they have a guaranteed treatment team that's intensive, housing for that person, and an available bed, locked or unlocked bed, to provide treatment. We're in the process right now of doing outpatient conservatorships. We literally, in the past couple of months, have engaged people in the street and engaged the courts on cases where we were unable to get them treatment, and without using the hospital and the emergency room, which for many people can be a traumatic experience, and spending tons and tons of money in a system that's overly jammed, we've actually managed to conserve people who are now living either in boarding cares or in supportive housing and getting treatment. So this is a big thing, and it's not changing LPS law, it's changing the practice of LPS law. Although, don't get me wrong, these laws are antiquated and they need to be revisited in a big way. Right.
This is a topic we could talk about all day. I think it's really, really problematic. We unfortunately I have so many questions to ask you, but I need to turn over to the public here that are just have many questions as well. So let me just go to a couple of these. All right. Paula asks, is there a program that can be started in jails where mental health defendants can be medicated and evaluated inside the jail so that they don't have to go, for example, to Patton? What do you think about that?
Well, I believe that there are programs. Not everybody goes to Patton. You only go to Patton
Right.
if you're found incompetent to stand trial. There are other programs, and we have people with, as they call them, yellow shirts, people that are being treated for mental health problems inside the jail. The problem is that, from what I see, is if they tell the person as they're being booked going into the jail that they have a history of mental problems or they take a particular medication, the doctors and the psychologists in the jail are so time pressurized that they just do a very cursory exam. They don't have any medical records or records from any hospitals that the people have been in, and they give them whatever medication they think is going to help, and then usually, I mean, there's no therapy that goes on in the jail. Maybe Dr. Sharon, is there any sort of program that is going to increase the therapy in the jail?
Well, yeah, I mean, there is mental health treatment available in the jails. There's medication. There's a modicum of therapy. I would say mostly kind of group oriented. We don't really provide that currently. But fundamentally, it's just not the right environment. It's not the right environment for someone to heal. And what we find is that when people when they're incarcerated, when they're not able to kind of recognize that there are opportunities for them outside of the jail, they're less likely to engage in treatment, and they don't respond as well to treatment. So from my perspective, it's a non-starter. When you may recall that the Board of Supervisors, with pressure from a lot of people, and I would give a lot of credit to the communities and also to a number of leaders within the county, actually canceled a contract to build what was called a mental health treatment facility, which is a custody facility, so that had bigger spaces, that would be have more treatment available to it. And what we're saying is that actually certainly what I'm saying is that we need care environments where, based on risk of violence or other legal concerns, where custody can be applied. In other words, you don't want a custody environment for someone that has care needs. You want a care environment.
Right.
And we're investing big time in the expansion of our beds. We're creating restorative care programs on our health campuses for this purpose, because we just don't want people who are sick with behavioral health problems locked up when their behaviors have been driven by their condition.
That makes sense to me. That's very moving. Thank you. Susan asked a question that is a little bit off the topic, but I think this is fascinating. Why are people put in prison or jail when they commit a crime, even though they are found to be mentally ill? What would you say to that?
It's complicated, I would say to that. There's been a tradition for decades. You commit a crime, you commit a violent crime, you get locked up.
Right.
There are some crimes that you have to have a specific intent. Just to give an example, to commit a robbery, that woman that I was talking about had to have specific intent to commit robbery. If she went to trial, there would be a defense put on that she didn't really she wasn't able to form that specific intent because she didn't know what she was doing. And so maybe the jury, based on that, would have found her not guilty of robbery. But there are other crimes that are assaultive crimes in which you don't have to have a specific intent. If you stab somebody or knock them over the head, and your mental state is not a defense to those sorts of crimes. And so there's really been no alternative places. Oh, let me just also add that even if the person is mentally ill, we have so few, at least I always heard there's like 1 or 2 locked facilities for mentally ill, violent people that need to be locked up, that we could send them to the county. I can't remember the name, but there was a long waiting list to get in. Wow. So it's either there or prison.
That's
if I could, I mean, we have a number of facilities, locked and unlocked facilities around the county. And the fact of the matter is that we don't have nearly enough bed inventory. And I studied this with my team, with help from other departments and outside experts, and estimate that we're about 4,000 beds short in the county of Los Angeles, which is actually, we probably have about 3,000 when it comes down to it that exist currently. And I would say that about half of them are acute and half of them are subacute. And some of the subacute facilities actually do provide services and care, and I would say a brand of custody for individuals that have been violent, and then of course there's the state hospitals. But I have to say on this topic that there's something you brought up, Judge, earlier that's really important, and that gets to the funding. We're 4,000 beds short in Los Angeles County. We're 500,000 units short of housing in Los Angeles County. We don't have enough clinical services in Los Angeles County for mental health or for addictions. The state looks at the counties to determine whether we have what they call an adequate network. Los Angeles is considered to have an adequate network because of the people we engage them relatively well. And we engage probably 250 to 300,000 people a year across the county who have serious mental illness, because that's our business, is serious mental illness. But the fact of the matter is we probably need to engage twice that number of people. When the state says, oh, well, Dr. Sharon, we're really happy that your network is adequate, I say, well, it's actually not. And if you want to helicopter in 400 clinicians to Skid Row every day, that would be fine with me, because we're nowhere near adequate in that sense. There is parity law at the federal level. There's parity in the state of California with the new Senate Bill 855.
Do you want to explain briefly what parity means?
Well, I'm sorry. Yeah, parity just means that you've got to treat medical conditions as medical conditions evenly, and that your investment in mental health needs to be the same as your investment in kidney disease. I mean, someone that has chronic kidney disease might require dialysis, multiple times a week, and they might have to get hospitalized for extended periods of time. That's a big investment. That costs a lot. We don't do that for people that have chronic mental illnesses that are profound and who are constantly on and off the streets, in and out of hospitals, in and out of the jail, getting traumatized, getting worse, having long periods of time without treatment. So we have to really understand that, and we have to invest. We really, really need to double down on investment in behavioral health in order to have adequate networks, in order to have communities that are enriched to help keep people, include them, and make them a part of, frankly, our society.
Right. I totally agree with you. I'm curious whether both of you think that the social view, society's view of mental illness has changed in the last 10 years. Particularly, I'm thinking with COVID, so many more people are struggling with mental illness than really ever have before. And I'm hoping that will bring an awareness and a compassion that hasn't existed before, and maybe the funding that you speak about. But do you think society's view of mental illness has changed in the past 10 years?
Let the judge go first.
I can just give a real short question. I think certainly there has been more of an understanding in the criminal justice system from the criminal justice partners, the prosecutors, our new elected district attorney who's going to be starting, that there has to be something different. But I can also say that in terms of compassion, quote unquote, and understanding, I just read Nextdoor. I don't know if you all know what that is, but it's a community bulletin board where people in the community comment upon what's going on. And I live in an area where there's a lot of mentally ill and homeless people, and the remarks are really shocking.
Yes.
When people can be anonymous about what they think needs to be done.
I would agree with that. And you mentioned earlier about, I believe it was a judge or someone that had a family member with addictions, and that really changed their tune. And I think that's absolutely true. And it can really turn a person on a dime. And I would say that, we've talked a lot about different equalizers with COVID. And I would say there are so many people that are suffering from, mental symptoms.
Yes.
That it is creating a different kind of cultural understanding of how important it is to be functioning, emotionally, mentally, and that without it, it's very, very difficult. So I look for silver linings in COVID, and there's a lot of them, and that's certainly one of them. And in this issue of exclusion and not figuring out ways for us to come up with solutions where people can be a part of the community is a huge problem, and it's not getting any better.
Well, I am very happy to hear that you see any silver lining to COVID, and I would agree with you. I think people are definitely more aware of how precious their mental health is to them on a daily basis, and I hope they put their money behind that. As you say, on that hopeful note, it's 6 o'clock and we have to end. And thank you so much for participating. It's just been fascinating.
Well, thank you for doing all the moderation. It's been
You're
terrific.
very welcome.
And I want to thank all three of you for sharing your evening with us, for this fascinating and informative discussion. I think you've given us all a lot to think about. And I hope that when we resume and have another discussion about mental health and the law, maybe some progress will have been made, and more people that need treatment. I mean, those statistics that you shared, Dr. Sharon, are pretty shocking. That 400, I think you said We're 500,000 units short on housing and 4,000 beds short.
Treatment beds, yeah.
That is really very sad.
Yeah, it is.
And I appreciate all that you're doing. And no, but there couldn't be anybody better in charge of the LA County Department of Mental Health to help us make some important changes. And Judge Katherine, thank you for writing this book that began this discussion. We're so grateful to you. And Terri, stepping in at the last minute, we are so grateful and really, truly, you've done what Jewish people call a mitzvah. So we're very, very grateful. And to all of you that tuned in tonight, thank you so much for being here. I hope that you found the program fascinating and learned a lot. And I hope that you stay well and safe. And we look forward to seeing you, I believe on December 1st is our next Open Mind program, when we're going to be screening the new film, Weight of Gold, which is about athletes and mental health issues. So thank you very much, everyone. Have a wonderful evening.
Bye-bye.